So Landscapes of Injustice is a partnership project in Canada, formed of universities, museums, and community organizations to research and tell the history of the forced sale of Japanese Canadian-owned property in the 1940s.
Okay, so for what I understand, your role in it and the goal of the association is about like retaking a cultural memory which is like narcotized or is like silenced now in Canada. So do you believe that this organization could have like a big impact in retaking this cultural memory of the Canadian Japanese people?
So, yeah, I mean it's I guess culture is a noisy place, right?
Yeah.
So we compete with a lot of other preoccupations, a lot of other interests. So what can we accomplish? I think our aim, at least, is to maintain in conversation this topic, and through it, topics like it, topics of citizenship and losses of citizenship, of belonging and losses of home, of race and racism in Canadian history. And so for some people, those people most connected with our project, the dozens of students who pass through, Japanese Canadian community members and organizations that are connected. So the people most intimately connected with the project, I think, will have an enduring impact on them and make a meaningful long-term contribution to the study of this history and the knowledge of it. More broadly, in Canada, it's a challenge. My hope is to help Canada to be a place where we don't stop conversing about our most difficult histories. So some people maybe seek closure or a way that a society can deal with and move on from its most difficult histories. My objective personally is instead to be part of a society that continues to converse about its historical injustice and to make that part of many conversations that happen while we confront our present challenges. And so the aim is to make it part of the noise of Canadian public conversation, I guess.
Right. Okay, so since we're a literary magazine, we would like to ask you, what is the role of literature in cultural memory?
Broadly, well, in this case, I mean, as Professor Lamberti suggested, literature was critical to the movement that brought these topics to widespread recognition in Canada. And Joy Kagawa's work in particular, which dovetailed chronologically with the movement towards redress in Canada. That book was Obasan was a part of what brought Canada to confront this history, but then also has been a vehicle for many Canadians encountering this past in the decades since, as one of those books that's very commonly assigned in elementary schools in Canada, or middle schools. It'll be one of the places where someone becoming an adult in Canada first encounters this history is through literature. So I think both in the origins of Canada's working with this history and in the ongoing process, that particular piece of literature in particular has had a central role.
Okay, thanks.
Some say that when talking about culture and the problems of a particular culture, it is already too late, and it doesn't matter because that culture already had its problems and there's nothing that can be done about it. Do you think that right now the Japanese Canadian culture still has a meaning, or they are to be considered only Canadians? And is there a way to reconfigure and recreate a Japanese Canadian culture and community, or are they to be considered just a part of a greater Canadian unity and society?
Yeah. So I mean, so I think the problem in this project, if you want to think of a problem or a social problem of this project, is not a Japanese-Canadian social problem or cultural problem. I would think of it as a Canadian or British Columbian problem that is at the base of this history. Japanese Canadians responded to an injustice perpetrated against them, both individually and collectively, as we would hope that if people might be able to, with flexibility and resilience, and have really Japanese Canadians been a people of remarkable success since the Second World War. And so what does it mean then in this context to confront this history? It's not a project of fixing something wrong within Japanese Canadian culture, at least not from my perspective. I think there's a strong Canadianness, if you want, within Japanese Canadian culture, and a strong sense of collective activism, of collective and individual achievement. Rather, I think it's our project, which is comprised of both Japanese Canadians and non-Japanese Canadians, both in its research team and the students who work on it and the community that surrounds it. I think the project is to, let's say, enrich Canadian democracy and society by continuing to be a country, or increasingly become a country that can deal seriously with its with the injustices that have been perpetrated in Canada on the one hand, and then I think for Japanese Canadians involved in the project and for those connected with the project, it's an opportunity to have unearthed aspects of this history that have been concealed, so the kind of government logics and processes that resulted in their dispossession, to see connections that have sometimes been dispersed. So the policy was to break up a community and to disperse it across a country, and the project is one of many different efforts within the Japanese Canadian community to draw those connections back together, people and institutions that are apart coming together in projects together. And Japanese Canadians, I know, within the project are finding new contexts, new allies with whom to discuss dimensions of their own personal history. So to me, it's a kind of a problematic of Canadian society or of Canadian pluralism, that maybe there's some ongoing work of repair, let's say, within Canadian society, to which Japanese Canadians are contributing. But it's not a project to kind of repair Japanese Canadians or something. Yeah.
Does a literature from a third point of view about the experience of Japanese Canadians exist? And if so, if it does, what's the main point they try to make when witnessing the injustices the Japanese Canadian community had to suffer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's very limited, I would say, understanding in Canada of those witness, bystander perspectives. Most of our work in Canada has been to understand either the government actors, often in terms of the racism of the policies that they created, or on the other hand, to understand Japanese Canadian experiences and perspectives. Of course, most of the people who lived through this history were neither Japanese Canadian nor state officials. They were everyday British Columbians, for example, and other Canadians. But in British Columbia, thousands of people who bought or acquired the property of Japanese Canadians, hundreds who submitted bids to purchase the homes, businesses, and farms of Japanese Canadians. So really, as my experience in working on the project is that almost any family that was in British Columbia in the 1940s has intimate connections to this history. I was at someone's house recently, and a woman brought up from the basement china ware, dishes and cups that her family had acquired from a Japanese-Canadian family when they left British Columbia, with they said the intention to return them. But here I was in their living room in Victoria, holding in my hands a piece of chinaware that I was only in my hand because of the dispossession. In a sense, I was participating in the dispossession of property by holding that property that could only come that way into my hand. And I think that's probably true of almost any society in which large-scale injustice has been perpetrated, that almost every family that has been in that society from that time will have some connection to that history, sometimes very tangible. So our project is working to both through oral history, so we'll be the first project to interview people in these categories of kind of bystander and witness. It's traditionally always been the case that the people interviewed are Japanese Canadians. And really, scarcely any research has ever asked what are the perspectives and memories and kind of family legacies of having witnessed or benefited from the dispossession of property. So our project will try to do that and to convey those perspectives, both through oral history and other archival methods as well. But there's very, very little.
Okay, so you talked about the role of students in your organization. So as you said before in your presentation, you kind of need more students. You search for them. So how could there be a role for Italian students in your organization?
Well, we're looking for talented and engaged students. So every summer, particularly students who are at undergraduate level, can apply to a number of research positions on the project. They're very competitive. We get outstanding applications from outstanding students, but we're looking for and pay reasonably well. We pay a full-time wage for the summer. Students to work in a whole range of areas on the project, and so it's been great for me to have the opportunity to present to audiences here in Italy, and we would welcome applications to those positions, which will be listed in March. If we have outstanding applicants from Italy, then we'd be delighted to consider them.
Okay, so I think that's all.
I think that's all.
That's enough. Okay.
Okay.
Turn it off.
All right.